If you've ever felt the kind of sadness that makes your chest physically ache, you know how incredibly vulnerable it makes you feel. You just want to hide from the world. But what if I told you there are things out there that can smell that vulnerability? Things that feed on a broken heart. They say grief changes a person. But in my building, grief doesn't change you. It hunts you. I moved into the Oakwood apartments after a completely devastating breakup. My life was in ruins, my bank account was drained, and the rent here was suspiciously cheap. I was too exhausted to care about the peeling wallpaper or the damp smell in the hallways. On my second day, I was hauling a box up the stairs when I met Mrs. Higgins, an old woman from the ground floor. She grabbed my arm with freezing cold fingers, looked at me with these hollow, terrified eyes, and gave me a warning I'll never forget.
Whatever happens in that apartment, sweetie, do not let yourself cry. I mean it. The morning man lives in the walls. He feeds on despair. If he hears you weeping...
I politely pulled my arm away, laughed it off, and locked myself in my room. I thought she was just a crazy old lady suffering from dementia. I didn't believe in monsters. But 2 days later, the police knocked on my door. Mrs. Higgins had thrown herself from the roof in the middle of the night. I dropped my phone on the floor. The screen cracked, but I didn't care. I sank to the dirty kitchen tiles, pulled my knees to my chest, and before I could stop myself, I started to sob. I cried so hard my lungs burned and my vision blurred. I was completely consumed by my own misery. But then, the temperature in the room plummeted. It happened in seconds. My breath turned to thick white mist in the air. A layer of frost rapidly crawled across the kitchen window. And from the dark hallway outside my locked door, I heard it. Heavy, wet footsteps. Squelch, squelch, squelch. Like someone walking slowly in soaked, heavy leather boots. And the footsteps stopped right outside my apartment. I instantly covered my mouth with both hands, biting down on my fingers to stifle my tears. I held my breath until my chest screamed for air.
Let it out. I can taste it. Cry for me.
Please just go away. Leave me alone.
The doorknob twisted so violently I thought the metal would snap. The heavy wooden frame began to groan and splinter. I backed away, staring at the peephole. Suddenly, the hallway light shining through the little glass circle went dark. A shadow had covered it. I crept closer, my heart hammering in my throat, and looked through. Standing in the flickering hallway light was a tall man in a soaking wet black funeral suit. But where his face should have been, there was just smooth, pale skin. No eyes, no nose, no eyebrows, just a blank canvas of flesh, ruined only by a jagged, bloody slit where a mouth should be. And that slit was smiling. The top hinge of my front door snapped with a loud crack. I didn't wait. I bolted for the bedroom, threw open the window leading to the rusty fire escape, and scrambled out into the freezing rain. Somebody help me! Call the police! Please! I climbed out onto the slick metal grating just as I heard my bedroom door explode inward. Splinters of wood showered the room. I looked back over my shoulder, and my heart completely stopped. The face faceless man wasn't walking. He was crawling across my bedroom ceiling like a massive, wet spider. His long limbs were bent at impossible angles, and his head twisted completely backward to face me, that bloody slit opening wide to let out a horrific, watery screech.
I panicked. I slipped on the wet iron grating and fell 3 stories straight down into the alley. I survived the drop, but my spine was shattered. I'm lying in a hospital bed right now. The doctors say I might never walk again. My family tells me I should be happy to be alive. But every night, when the ward goes completely quiet and the nurses leave, I hear wet, heavy footsteps pacing in the hallway outside my room, just waiting for me to break down and cry.
There's a saying in real estate, if a deal looks too good to be true, someone probably died there. But what if they didn't just die? What if whatever killed them is still living in the walls, just waiting for the next name on the lease? If a landlord ever offers you a month rent-free, do yourself a favor. Turn around and run. I learned the hard way that cheap rent is usually paid in blood.
I was a broke college grad who had just moved to Los Angeles. I needed a place immediately, and I found a studio apartment in a massive, run-down complex on the edge of the city. The landlord, Mr. Davis, seemed eager to hand over the keys. Almost too eager. The day I moved in, I was carrying a box up the stairs when I had to press against the wall to let 2 paramedics pass. But the bag wasn't stiff like a corpse should be. It wobbled and stretched downward as they carried it, almost grazing the steps. It looked like they were carrying a giant, heavy water balloon filled with jelly.
Excuse me, officer, what happened here? Is the building safe?
Mind your business, kid. Just keep walking and stay in your unit.
A neighbor smoking a cigarette on the landing looked at me with pure, unadulterated pity. She blew out a cloud of smoke and told me the dead guy was the previous tenant of apartment 3B. My new apartment. I tried to ignore the bad vibes. I spent the evening unpacking my boxes, eating cold takeout, and trying to get some sleep on a cheap mattress. But around 3 a.m., the absolute silence of the room was broken. Tap, tap, tap. I heard a sharp knock on the glass of my window. My blood ran cold. I lived on the 3rd floor. There was no balcony outside my window. There was no fire escape. Just a sheer, flat brick wall dropping 30 feet down into a dark concrete alley. I grabbed a heavy flashlight from my nightstand, slowly walked to the window, and pulled. Staring back at me from the other side of the glass was a man. But his neck was stretched out like a fleshy snake, at least 10 feet long, connecting to a body that was standing somewhere in the shadows down below. What the hell are you? Oh my God. His skin was mottled purple and rubbery like stretched latex. He smiled at me, his jaw unhinging completely, dropping down to his chest. His elongated, boneless fingers reached up and began furiously clawing at my window screen, trying to pry it open. I didn't care about my security deposit. I didn't care about my furniture. I shoved whatever clothes I could grab into a duffel bag, threw on my shoes, and ran out of the apartment, leaving the door wide open. As I sprinted blindly down the dim hallway toward the stairwell, I crashed right into my landlord, Mr. Davis. He was holding a heavy Maglite flashlight and a baseball bat. He looked absolutely terrified, sweating profusely. "Watch where you're going!
What are you doing out here? Get back in your room and lock the door!
There's a monster outside my damn window. It's trying to get in. I'm leaving, and you can keep the money.
Before Davis could answer, the fluorescent light bulb above us flickered, buzzed loudly, and shattered into a dozen pieces. We were plunged into darkness. From the pitch black end of the hall, something slithered out of the shadows. It was the Rubber Man. His legs were braided together like a twisted rope of flesh. He moved across the carpet like a massive, disgusting inchworm, his impossible body stretching forward and then compressing with a wet slap.
You took my room. You shouldn't be here.
I completely froze against the wall, paralyzed by fear. Davis raised his baseball bat and tried to run past it, but the entity lunged with lightning speed. It wrapped its rubbery, endlessly stretching body around the landlord like a giant python. Davis screamed in agony as I heard his ribs snap like dried twigs. The monster squeezed tighter and tighter until the landlord went totally limp, his body crumpling and folding into a horrible, compact.
I didn't stay to watch it finish the job. I bolted down the stairs, burst through the front doors, and never looked back. I still don't know what they took out of that building in a body bag that first day. But I know what they left behind. And I know why it fits so easily.
When you're told you only have 6 months to live, you stop being afraid of the dark. You stop caring about ghost stories, local legends, and the things that go bump in the night. Because the monster is already inside you. But I'm here to tell you that there are fates far worse than a terminal illness. And some of them are hiding in the basement of Foundry 4.
I was diagnosed with severe late-stage lung cancer. The medical bills were instantly drowning my family in debt, and I needed to leave them with something. So I volunteered for the hazard pay night watch at the old auto parts factory on the edge of town. Everyone knew the place had a dark history, but the pay was triple the normal rate. On my first night, the site manager, Foreman Bill, handed me a heavy ring of keys. He looked at me with dead, serious eyes.
You do your rounds on the upper floors, Marcus. You punch the clock at the stations. But whatever you do, no matter what you hear, do not go down into the basement level. Lock the heavy steel door at the top of those stairs and stay in the office.
What's down there, Bill? Asbestos? Toxic chemicals? You know it can't hurt me anymore.
Something worse. Just lock the door, Marcus. I mean it.
My first week was perfectly fine. Just dust, rats, and the smell of old machine oil. I thought Bill was just trying to mess with the new guy. But on my 8th night, things changed drastically.
I was sitting in the glass security booth, reading a paperback and drinking bitter black coffee, when I heard it echoing through the cavernous building.
Footsteps. Heavy, echoing footsteps coming from the main factory floor.
Hello? The factory is closed for the night. You are trespassing on private property. I'm calling the police.
Nobody answered. The footsteps just kept pacing. I grabbed my heavy Maglite flashlight and a massive steel wrench from the desk, took a deep breath, and walked out into the sea of rusted, silent machines. I followed the echoing sound all the way to the back of the factory, to the basement door. My stomach dropped. The thick iron padlock Bill had warned me about was lying on the concrete floor, snapped completely in half like a twig. The heavy steel door was wide open. A freezing draft blew up from the darkness below. The air smelled like old, oxidized copper and rotting sweet meat. I slowly shined my flashlight down into the pitch-black stairwell. Standing halfway down the stairs was a tall man wearing a filthy, blood-stained yellow raincoat. He slowly raised his head and looked up at me. His face was an absolute nightmare. He had no eyes, no nose, no jaw. Just a massive, hollow, perfectly round void in the center of his face, surrounded by rotten, gray, peeling skin.
I can smell the sickness inside you.
Get the hell back! Stay away from me! I dropped the wrench, grabbed the heavy steel door, and slammed it shut with everything I had. I threw my entire body weight against the freezing metal, just as the monster reached the top of the stairs. The creature slammed into the other side. The impact was so hard, the thick steel actually dented inward against my back. I could hear it pressing its hollow, faceless void directly against the crack of the doorframe, inhaling deeply.
Give me the bad lungs. Let me breathe.
A sudden, blinding, agonizing pain hit my chest. It felt like invisible meat hooks had been driven into my ribs and were pulling the air, the sickness, and my very soul straight out of my body and through the crack in the door. I was suffocating. With the last ounce of strength I had, I reached over and managed to slide the heavy iron deadbolt into place. The lock clicked. Instantly, the pulling sensation stopped. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. The monster howled in frustration, a sound like tearing metal. And its heavy footsteps slowly faded back down into the black basement. I quit the next morning. I handed Bill the keys and walked away. I never told them what I saw down there. I don't have much time left anyway. The doctors made that clear. But sometimes, when my cancer cough gets really bad in the middle of the night, I swear the temperature in my bedroom drops. I can smell that rotting copper. And I know that thing is standing in the dark corner of my room, just waiting for me to exhale one last time. Debt doesn't just empty your pockets. It eats your soul alive, stealing your sleep and making you flinch at every floorboard creak. My failed business left me with a mountain of debt that couldn't be paid off by honest work. Now, the concrete walls of this ragged Oak Ridge Towers apartment complex have become my tomb. Every month, ruthless local collectors show up taking my last pennies, forcing me to humiliate myself and make excuses while hiding the
burning hatred inside.
But there's a creepy feature in our 11-story building. The 6th floor. It's completely empty, dark, and boarded up. Lights never burn there. The electric meters are at 0, and time seems to have frozen in the distant past. As kids, we called it the dead deck. We believed that behind those old plywood doors lived something alien, something completely detached from our reality, something capable of granting any dark desire for a terrible, unknown price.
Well, Marcus, I see you're in no hurry to return the boss's money. Your pathetic excuses about sick leaves and 3 side jobs don't interest us at all. My boys are tired of driving to this garbage high-rise every single month just to listen to your whining. We're giving you exactly 10 days. After that, we take this apartment. And you? Well, let's just say we'll find a way to make you pay with something much more valuable than paper money.
Brad, please, I beg you, don't touch me. I just got off sick leave and I took 3 new jobs. I'll turn myself inside out. I won't sleep at all, but I will return every single cent, I swear. Take the keys to my old car for now. It's down in the yard. It's literally everything valuable I have left in this world. Just look at me. I'm doing my best. Just give me this one last chance. Don't ruin me.
Man, you literally look like a walking corpse. You're constantly clutching your chest at any outside noise. Come in. Sit down. Check out my new indie horror game. It's about an abandoned underground bunker ruled by an insane AI. It might distract you from your thoughts. I'm really worried about you. I even asked around the neighbors to see if we can legally stop these collectors, but they're gonna drive you straight into the grave.
Thanks, Dylan. But there's no legal way out of this debt trap. They'll eat me alive, take the apartment, and make me homeless. I just want this endless nightmare to stop once and for all. I want those 3 smug bastards to vanish from my life forever, to step into some black void and never dare cross my threshold again. I can't live like this anymore. It's either them or me.
Marcus, listen to me closely. We grew up in the same yard, and I know Brad is bleeding you dry. If there's really no way out and you're at the edge, you need to go down to the dead deck. The childhood legends were true. In times of ultimate trouble, the entities living behind those plywood doors come to help. Just remember the main rules. Never ask for money directly. State your wish clearly from the heart and leave immediately. It's deadly to stay there.
Zach, did you drink too much cheap booze tonight, or do you really still believe in these first-grader fairy tales? What entities are you talking about? You think a dusty, abandoned hallway with broken tiles will solve my problems with real-world gangsters? I'm facing prison or a grave, and you're offering me childhood folklore? It sounds completely insane, Zach. My fingers pressed the button for the 6th floor on their own instead of the 11th. When I stepped into that dark corridor covered in dust and peeling paint, my heart almost stopped. I approached the locked apartment located right under mine and froze. Right in the plywood door, instead of a normal peephole, there was a real, living human eye. It glistened wetly, its pupil dilating and contracting, tracking my every move. My mind completely fractured at that sight. A primal fear took over, and a desperate plea wormed out of my chest. Get rid of him! Make him disappear and never dare come to my house again! I didn't think about the phrasing. It just burst out. Suddenly, the old door lock clicked. The door slowly creaked open, and a white plastic face, painted with a wide, toothy smile, peeked out from the thick black dust. turned around and flew down the stairs. The next day, Brad and his dogs didn't show up. The Rolls Royce stayed in the yard for days. Eventually, I went down to the 6th floor. The door to that empty apartment was slightly ajar, filling the air with a thick smell of iron. On the floor, in pools of dark blood, lay the mutilated, mangled bodies of the collectors. And from the darkness of the closet, it crawled out. A tall entity woven from black, twitching wires with a glossy, smiling mannequin mask. The creature slowly raised a long, whip-like arm and pointed to the dusty windowsill. And there, among dead flies and spider webs, lay my car keys, completely covered in thick crimson blood. It was a gift, and now I'm free from debt. But every time someone shouts my name on the street, my heart stops. The lift constantly stops at the 6th floor by itself. I know it is watching me through the air vents, waiting for my gratitude. Where I'm next. Working the night shift at the old Blackwood sawmill means immersing yourself in absolute isolation among the dense northwestern woods. That cursed night, I stayed late at an industrial machine to finish cleaning the mechanisms, thinking it would take just a few minutes. Because of that trifle, I missed the last worker shuttle, which left exactly at 2 in the morning. My phone was dead, there was no signal, and I had no choice but to walk. The long way down the dark, foggy logging road felt endless. The forest around me felt alive, frozen in malicious anticipation. Every snap of a twig made me jump, and I constantly shined my flashlight up at the towering pine trees, feeling like someone was tracking me from the canopy. The fog grew thicker, swallowing the light, turning the familiar road into a trap. About 2 miles into the thick fog, I noticed 2 silhouettes ahead. They looked like women in long, dark coats, walking tightly pressed against each other. Glad that I wasn't entirely alone on this abandoned highway, I called out loudly, asking them if we were heading the right way to the suburban road. They didn't turn around or answer, but they unnaturally picked up their pace, moving synchronously, like puppets on a string. When I almost caught up with them, they suddenly twisted their bodies toward me with a sharp, broken, mechanical jerk. The flashlight beam caught what ruined my sanity forever. Those women had no faces at all. Just perfectly smooth, tightly stretched gray skin with no eyes, no nose, and no mouth. But worst of all, their lips were crudely sewn together and stitched to each other with thick, coarse black threads, forming a 2-headed silent monster. With a wild scream, I rushed away, turning off the road straight into the thick forest, breaking my nails on branches. Suddenly, in a small clearing illuminated by the pale moon, I saw an off-road car and a local guy who had gone missing a week ago. He was on his knees, sobbing helplessly. But above him stood a monstrous silhouette, an 8-foot-tall man in a tattered leather butcher's apron, holding a giant rust-covered logging axe. The guy was begging for his life, pointing to his car, but that giant didn't make a single sound. He just raised the massive axe above his head, brought it down with inhuman force, literally splitting the poor guy's skull in 2. The face split into 2 halves, falling on his shoulders. I ran blindly through the brushwood, the iron taste of blood filling my mouth as I fled the butcher. I ran through the night until morning, finally collapsing unconscious right on the doorstep of the factory office, where the morning shift found me. My lungs couldn't handle the wild overload and that freezing graveside fog. Now I'm coughing up blood, slowly dying in a hospital bed. But the scariest thing happened this morning, when a young student came to work his shift.
He ran to the manager to quit, stammering with horror. Before leaving, he whispered to me that in the dark corridors of the workshop all night, someone invisible was heavily walking slowly, dragging a huge, sharp metal object across the concrete floor, leaving deep scratches. The butcher followed me here, and he is just waiting for the lights to go out.
Working as a remote freelancer is the perfect way to slowly go insane within four walls, where your only companion is the constant hum of a computer. My rented apartment in Chicago overlooks a narrow, dirty brick alley between buildings, where twilight reigns year-round. Only the fire escape and dark windows of the neighboring building are visible from my desk, creating a strange feeling of being enclosed.
Closer to midnight, distracting myself from work, I began to notice creepy anomalies in the windows opposite. New tenants moved in there, but their movements were unnaturally smooth, mechanical, completely devoid of human grace. I started a notebook where I wrote down the dates and times. A man in a strict coat and a tall woman stood motionless at the window for hours, staring straight into my room with unblinking eyes.
Last night, my paranoia reached its peak, and I decided to use my quadcopter with a high-resolution camera to look inside their dim room. With a racing heart, I put on headphones, connected the tablet to the remote control, and slowly steered the drone across the dark alley, right straight to their dusty window. The camera displayed on the screen made my blood run cold. The room was a sterile workshop. These creatures were sitting at a long metal workbench, reassembling human bodies like parts of a plastic model kit. Detached skins hung on racks like clothes. The woman cold-bloodedly detached her own pale arm with a mechanical click, replacing it with another muscle part from a box. There was not a drop of pain on her face, only a dead mannequin emptiness. But the wildest terror paralyzed me a second later. From the black void of their corridor behind the mannequins, a huge, white, faceless figure of a monster materialized. It had no clothes, no features, just an aerodynamic, smooth body. It slowly turned its head and looked straight into the lens of my drone, as if looking into my very soul through the tablet screen. It knew I was watching. My fingers, numb with fear, jerked on the remote. The drone shot up, the connection broke, and the image went black. I threw the remote away, crawled to the wall with a deafening ringing in my ears, and frantically dialed 911. But the operator only condescendingly told me to calm down, taking my story for the delusions of an overworked mad freelancer. No one was coming to help me.
Julian's apartment was found in total disarray. Things were scattered everywhere, as if someone was packing in a rush. On the floor lay a broken tablet, a smashed drone, and a notebook filled with incoherent notes about mannequin neighbors and a faceless entity. The obvious conclusion: a mentally ill, lonely freelancer in a state of severe paranoia inflicted injuries on himself or fled. There was no signs of forced entry.
The lock of my front door clicked quietly, and a smooth, cold figure entered the hallway. It threw me against the wall with inhuman strength, shattering my spine. The last thing I saw before the
darkness covered me forever was my own face walking into the room. My own empty, absolutely soulless gaze staring down at me, and the cold, metallic glint of a surgical tool in my own fingers. I blew the acrid gray smoke into the frigid night air and coughed violently. My damaged lungs burned, protesting the cheap, stale tobacco. I just sat there, watching the cherry-red ember glow faintly against the peeling, water-damaged wallpaper of my cramped, miserable room. Just an hour ago, Mrs. Higgins, the abrasive old woman from the floor below, leaned out her window. She started screaming like a banshee into the quiet night, aggressively accusing me of harassing her with midnight phone calls. Her shrill voice echoed off the concrete courtyard. I completely snapped. My temper flared up like a dropped match in a puddle of gasoline. Without thinking, I threw my burning cigarette butt right at her head and slammed my window shut. Now, sitting alone in the dark, I was drowning in a toxic swamp of guilt and creeping paranoia. I'd just gotten out of the state penitentiary for armed robbery. 15 brutal, soul-crushing years of my life completely gone. The absolute last thing I needed was the local cops knocking on my door to drag me back into that unforgiving concrete hellhole over a noise complaint. But the chilling, inescapable reality of my miserable situation was that the old hag was right to be angry. My old, heavy black rotary phone sitting on the chipped wooden desk like a dormant explosive device had been ringing at exactly midnight for 3 nights straight. Punctual as a mortician. Every single time I picked up that heavy, cold plastic receiver, there was only oppressive, heavy silence pressing against my ear. It felt like a physical weight, a suffocating vacuum that seemed to suck the very oxygen right out of my cramped bedroom. Then, faint, rhythmic static would start to hiss through the earpiece. It wasn't normal line interference. It sounded exactly like someone was standing in a dark, empty room, gripping the phone tightly, listening on the other end, just waiting patiently for me to speak first. I felt it deep in my aching bones. These anonymous calls were intimately tied to my dark, violently guarded past. Looking at the clock, ticking relentlessly toward midnight, I knew the phone was bound to ring again. My scarred hands trembled violently as I reached for another cigarette. I was a ticking time bomb, wired to explode. I was trapped in a room that felt smaller and more claustrophobic with every passing second. I was just sitting there, completely helpless in the gloom, waiting agonizingly for my unforgiven, buried sins to finally catch up to me. At precisely 12 a.m., the phone erupted. It was a sharp, dissonant scream of electricity and rusted gears that simply shouldn't exist in this modern century. The harsh, jarring noise vibrated aggressively through the desk, traveling up my arms and directly into my teeth. I grabbed the heavy receiver, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped, panicked animal. I gripped the plastic so hard my knuckles turned white. I was ready to scream, ready to viciously curse out whoever was playing these sadistic, twisted psychological games with my sanity. But the angry, venomous words died instantly in my dry throat. Instead of a prankster's laughter, all I heard was wet, heavy breathing. It sounded like air bubbling through thick mud. Then, a raspy, metallic voice spoke, sending jagged, ice-cold shivers cascading down my spine. It didn't sound completely human. The cadence was entirely wrong. It sounded exactly like rusted iron blades slowly grinding against dry, ancient bone. I realized with sickening clarity that I wasn't talking to a neighborhood prankster. I was talking to a ghost from my violent past.
He is climbing the stairs right now, Nick. The voice was a sickening, vibrating purr that echoed in my skull. He's clutching a jagged, rusted iron crowbar in his cold, dead hands. He knows exactly where you hid that blood-stained cache under the floorboards. He remembers the old safe house back in '98, Nick. He wants his rightful stolen share, and much more than that. He wants your lying head served on a silver platter. Go ahead. Creep to the door. Look through the brass peephole. He's already standing in the hallway, patiently waiting for you to look. Don't blink, Nick, because his rotting face is the last thing you'll ever see. The debt you owe isn't paid in worthless paper money anymore. It's paid in agonizingly slow pieces of your flesh.
The line died with a hollow, brutally final click. I held the dead receiver to my ear for a long, agonizing minute, my blood running absolutely cold in my veins. Nobody on this entire earth knew about that botched robbery or the hidden bloody money we buried. Nobody knew our secret, except my former partner in crime. And my partner had supposedly died. Stabbed 30 times in a violent, bloody prison riot over a year ago. I swallowed hard, my mouth tasting like copper, as the crushing silence in my room was suddenly horribly broken. Heavy, agonizingly slow, limping step echoed just outside my thin wooden door. The sound of a heavy boot dragged aggressively against the cheap hallway carpet. Thump. Drag. Thump. The horrific footsteps stopped precisely in front of my entrance. My knees went entirely weak. The entire room seemed to darken instantly, as if the shadows themselves were physically closing in to eagerly witness the impending carnage. I was a helpless prisoner of my own brutal history, trapped in this box where all the dead finally came knocking for their unforgiving due. The mandatory graveyard shift at the isolated sawmill was an exercise in pure, maddening, soul-crushing loneliness. The thick, unnatural Pacific fog rolled in from the dark valley and swallowed the yellow industrial work lights whole, turning the entire world into a gray void. In this blinding, swirling soup, even your own elongated shadows played cruel, terrifying psychological tricks on your tired, stinging eyes. I had voluntarily stayed late, agreeing to grease the massive gears of the main conveyor belt because I desperately needed the overtime pay.
I completely lost all track of time in the deafening, mechanical, hypnotic rhythm of the automated factory. Wiping thick, foul-smelling black grease from my calloused hands with a dirty shop rag, I finally walked out of the echoing, cavernous main processing hangar.
The absolute dead silence that violently hit me was immediately suffocating. It was heavy, with the crushing, oppressive weight of the ancient, towering forest. It
felt exactly like the woods were watching me intently, with a million unseen, starving eyes hidden in the dark tree line.
The entire evening crew had already clocked out and left on the rattling employee bus at exactly 2 a.m. I was now completely, utterly alone in this sprawling, decaying industrial tomb. Pulling out my smartphone from my heavy jacket, I cursed bitterly under my freezing breath.
0 bars. No service. I had absolutely no cellular signal down in this deep, cursed geographical bowl. I was effectively trapped here until the morning crew arrived at dawn, completely surrounded by miles and miles of whispering, jagged pine trees that blocked out the sky. I decided to head over to the old, corrugated metal tool shed to wait it out. There was a space heater in there, and it was at least somewhat warm. But as I began walking across the empty, gravel-filled yard, a cold, predatory feeling of being actively hunted washed over me. Every single tiny hair on my arms and the back of my neck stood straight up like copper wire. I checked my heavy-duty company-issued flashlight, clicking the rubber button on. But the cheap batteries were already fading fast, the weak bulb dimming noticeably by the second. The dying, jaundiced yellow beam cast long, eerie, distorted shadows that danced wildly across the rusted, forgotten logging equipment scattered around the yard. I felt incredibly exposed, like a fragile trespasser walking blindly through a forgotten, cursed graveyard of iron and rust. I was walking directly past the towering primary processing station when I finally heard it. A heavy, deliberate, metallic stomp echoed sharply on the iron catwalk directly above my head. I froze instantly in my tracks, my steel-toed boots practically glued to the concrete floor. I aimed my dying flashlight straight up toward the high, intersecting steel rafters. But the weak, pathetic beam was completely swallowed by the oily, dense fog that clung stubbornly to the iron beams. I couldn't see anything up there but swirling, toxic-looking gray mist.
Who the hell is up there? The shift is over. The yard is closed.
I called out blindly into the oppressive darkness. My heart was hammering violently against my ribcage like a trapped, desperate bird trying to escape. I gripped the heavy metal handle of my flashlight like a club.
My voice sounded incredibly thin, shaky, and downright pathetic. It was totally lost in the massive, echoing cavern of the industrial sawmill. It was as if the sprawling building itself was maliciously absorbing my sound, completely refusing to let me call out for any kind of help. No human voice answered my desperate call. Instead, the heavy metallic steps grew noticeably faster, becoming far more aggressive. Something enormous was pacing the narrow iron catwalk back and forth, moving exactly like a caged, starving predator actively tracking its next meal. Then, the heavy footsteps were accompanied by a wet, sickening, tearing sound that echoed in the gloom. It sounded exactly like thick slabs of raw, wet meat being violently ripped from a massive bone. I backed up slowly, my useless flashlight trembling uncontrollably in my sweaty palm. Suddenly, a massive, muscular, dark shape leaped blindly down from the completely obscured shadows above. It plummeted heavily through the thick fog and landed just 10 feet away from me. The sickening, thunderous thud vibrated violently through the thick concrete floorboards.
The stagnant air around me grew instantly, unnaturally freezing cold, chilling me to the bone. A vile, overwhelming stench hit my face. A putrid, gag-inducing mixture of violently burnt ozone and rotting, decayed meat. It completely filled my nostrils and made me physically choke. I stood, completely frozen in place, paralyzed by pure, primal shock. My breath caught sharply in my throat as the massive, shadowy shape slowly began to rise from its heavy crouch. I realized in a fraction of a second that whatever had just landed was absolutely not a human being. It was something terrible, ancient, and malformed that belonged exclusively to the darkest parts of the forest. It stared intently at me from the swirling shadows, its twisted, unnatural form unfolding piece by piece. I knew it was hunting me, and in this wasteland, I had nowhere to run.
The dinner I prepared hours ago sat completely untouched on the counter, the grease hardening into a pale film. Steve had called me from work at exactly 7 p.m., his voice completely normal as he promised he'd be through the front door in 30 minutes. Now, the microwave clock glowed 12:42 a.m. I tried calling his number 20 times, but it went straight to a dead tone. My chest felt incredibly tight, a cold weight pressing down on my lungs. The silence in this apartment was so heavy it made my ears ring. Every single rhythmic tick of the wall clock felt like someone tapping a fingernail directly against my skull. I was completely alone in the kitchen, but the space behind my back felt crowded. Like a dozen eyes were fixed on the back of my neck. We have rules here. Strict, unwritten laws that everyone in this building memorizes just to stay alive. You don't make noise after dark. You draw the heavy curtains before the street lamps turn on, and no matter what, you never open the lock for anyone. I knew what happened to Mrs. Gable down in apartment 3B last month when she forgot. She went out to throw away the trash past the curfew and simply never came back. The next morning, the landlord was already in her unit. He was calmly painting a thick layer of white over a dark stain on her linoleum floor. I could feel the building itself watching me right now through the hairline cracks in the yellowed wallpaper, just waiting for my foot to misstep. No walls. In the walls. Damn. Then, the sound started. It was a faint, wet scratching near the bottom of the front door. It didn't sound like an animal. It sounded like long, thin human fingernails dragging slowly across the old primer, hunting for a gap in the wood. My heart did a violent flip in my chest, the pulse throbbing painfully in my throat. I stood up, my knees shaking so badly I had to grip the edge of the table. I forced my feet to move across the cold linoleum into the dark hallway. I pressed my eye against the brass peephole, holding my breath. I was absolutely terrified that whatever was on the porch might be staring directly back into the glass. My palms left wet streaks on the doorframe. The old fluorescent bulb out in the common hallway flickered twice and died completely, plunging the landing into shadows. Standing right there on the welcome mat was Steve. But his posture was completely wrong.
His spine was bent sideways at a sharp, unnatural angle, and his head was turned entirely backward over his shoulder. His eyes were wide, glassy, and fixed on the plaster ceiling, while his right hand rose and fell mechanically. It struck the wood with a dull, heavy thud. The impact vibrated right through the floorboards into my socks. It looked like a mockery of him, a hollowed-out shell operating on broken joints. My mind locked up in terror.
Mary, open up. I forgot my keys on the counter, and it's getting freezing out here on the landing. The landlord found me by the stairs. He helped me find my way back to our door. He just wants to come in and say hello to you.
Please, Mary, just turn the deadbolt. It's so quiet out here in the hallway. Don't you want to come out and join us? You've been sitting alone behind that door for hours.
The landlord is a very patient man, but he really hates to be kept waiting in the dark. Just turn the lock, Mary. It's so easy to stop being afraid if you just let the shadows in.
I clamped both hands over my mouth, desperate to stifle the jagged, choking sobs rising in my throat. The voice had the right cadence, but the pitch was hollow, like someone speaking into a long metal pipe. Directly behind Steve's slumped shoulder, deep in the darkness of the stairwell, something else moved. I saw a massive, towering silhouette bristling with multiple thin joints. Long, needle-like fingers reached out of the dark, hooking into the fabric of Steve's jacket. I was holding his body upright like a discarded marionette. A thick, dark fluid seemed to ooze from the creature's limbs. I was dripping onto the floorboards. It was waiting for me to break, using my husband's voice to clear the way. Go away! You're not him. You're not Steve! I stumbled backward into the kitchen, my heel catching on the edge of the rug, sending me crashing against the baseboards. Through the tiny peephole, I saw Steve's dead lips stretch into a wide, skin-tearing smile. Then came a sharp, metallic snap as the deadbolt sheared right off the frame. The door swung wide open. The landlord stepped over the threshold. He was impossibly tall, his face a smooth, featureless mass of pale skin. He jerked forward with stiff, military precision. He dragged Steve's limp legs behind him across the floor like a sack of laundry. The warm air of the apartment instantly died, replaced by a freezing stench of old earth and rot that filled every square inch. There was no point in screaming. Nobody in this building was going to open their door to help me. As those long, cold fingers closed around my throat, my vision began to blur into black static. We were never tenants here. We were just inventory. Tomorrow morning, the white paint on the doorframe will be dry. A new couple will sign the lease, and they will sit at this exact table. They will whisper so they don't wake up the floorboards. I let my eyes close as the air left my chest, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, waiting for the new tenants to arrive.
I left my apartment at 2 a.m. with nothing but my canvas backpack and a notebook where I'd scribbled down everything I saw through my window. I didn't care where I went, as long as it had a lock. I paid cash for a bottom bunk in this cheap downtown hostel. I thought a crowded room of backpackers would keep me safe. But the second the clerk handed me my keycard, a cold sweat broke out across my lower back. The old floorboards groaned under every step I took, and the building felt like an old iron cage closing in around me. The layout of the room was completely unsettling. The air had this thick, chemical undertone, like a mixture of bleach and old wet soil. There were 5 other guys in the room. None of them had acknowledged me when I walked in. They just lay flat on their mattresses, staring straight up at the springs of the upper bunks with completely wide, unblinking eyes. Completely wide, unblinking eyes. In the green glow of the emergency exit sign, their skin looked slick, like wet rubber stretched tight over a frame. Nobody was scrolling on a phone. Nobody was snoring. They were just lying there, completely rigid, suspended in the dark like meat in a locker. Around 3 a.m., a strange sound woke me from a light doze. It was a wet, heavy wheeze, like someone inhaling through a wet sponge. I kept my face pressed into the pillow, opening my eyelids just a fraction of an inch. The neon sign from the bar across the street flickered through the blinds, casting red lines across the floor. The hostel manager, a massive guy with an unnaturally wide torso, was walking down the center aisle. He was dragging a heavy leather duffel bag that left a thick, dark streak on the wood. He didn't make a single sound as he moved, his bare feet sliding across the splinters with total, deliberate precision.
He stopped right at the foot of the bed opposite mine.
He reached out and pressed his long, gray fingers against the sleeping kid's cheek. Then, with a distinct, metallic click, the manager ran his thumb down the side of the boy's neck. The skin didn't bleed. It parted like a zipper, peeling back to reveal a hollow interior. It was packed with bundles of thin copper wires, spinning brass gears, and tiny blue sparks that pulsed in rhythm with that wet breathing. My heart stopped dead in my chest. Wow. This wasn't a place for travelers. It was a maintenance floor for things pretending to be human. And the guy holding the bag was checking the inventory. A sharp gasp escaped my throat before I could stop it. The manager's head snapped around a full 90 degrees to look directly into my bunk. His jaw unhinged until it hit his chest, revealing rows of thin silver needles instead of teeth. "We have a live one in number 4!" he roared. The sound wasn't a human voice. It was a metallic, grinding horn that vibrated the metal frame of my bed. I didn't hesitate. I rolled out of the sheets, hit the floor hard, and bolted for the hallway. I ran blindly toward the red exit sign. Behind me, the entire room erupted into chaos. I could hear the other 5 guests hitting the floor, their joints popping like firecrackers. They didn't run like people. They threw themselves forward on all 4s, their synthetic limbs clicking rapidly against the linoleum as they gained on me down the hall. I could feel the cold draft of their hands snapping at the fabric of my t-shirt. My lungs felt like they were bursting, the taste of pennies sharp on my tongue as I threw my weight against the heavy fire door.
The scene at the downtown hostel turned up absolutely nothing. According to city records, the building has been boarded up and condemned since the mid-2010s due to structural rot. When my partner and I walked through the rooms with our flashlights, the dust on the floorboards was completely undisturbed, at least an inch thick everywhere.
There were no signs of any recent guests, no backpacks, and no personal property left behind.
Just another transient kid slipping through the cracks of the Pacific Northwest. I signed off on the missing person report and closed the file, ignoring the faint, rhythmic ticking sound coming from behind the basement door.
They were too fast for me at the door. Now, I have the bottom bunk right by the front window, looking out at the rain washing over the pavement. My face feels incredibly tight, cold to the touch, and I can't feel my own pulse anymore. If you ever find yourself walking down this block past midnight, look up at the second floor. You'll see me standing behind the glass, my eyes wide and entirely fixed on the street, smiling down at you with a jaw that never gets tired. We have plenty of beds available tonight.